We're gonna get started right now. It's really great to see so many people here.
Maggie and I are talking to you out of Ely, Minnesota. We are Minnesota Power customers, as are many people on this Zoom right now. And we are talking today about Minnesota Power and its sale, which was finalized according to the company this Monday, and the purchase of the company by BlackRock, a BlackRock subsidiary named Global Infrastructure Partners, and the Canadian Pension Plan Investment Board. So two big private equity companies, which normally would compete against each other to make investments, but in this case teamed up to buy our electric utility. And if Senator McEwen, if you'd like to start us off and sort of talk about your thoughts on the deal, and then yeah,
Yeah.
Representative, if you could also.
Hey everybody, it's great to be here with all of you, and it's nice to see such a great turnout. This is really wonderful. Yeah, I'm State Senator Jenna McEwen. I represent Duluth in the Minnesota State Senate, and the sale is an issue that I've been following for a while now, and have become more and more educated about what it potentially is going to mean over probably this last summer and then fall, especially with the help from Cure and a bunch of people on this call to really kind of take a deeper dive and learn more about what this will mean for all of us. So I'm really excited that this conversation is happening. I'm looking forward to hearing what comes of it. And I guess my hope is that in this period of time coming up, that perhaps there will end up being an opening for us to transform our utility into a true public utility. That's what I'm going to have my eyes on as we move forward here, and really excited about the potential for that, but also I'm sort of bracing for what this is going to mean here in the next short term. So thanks everybody for joining us. Pleasure to be here.
Hi everybody, Bonjour, Zama Anaquad, Gazinin Dodem, Gazinin Nastavi Khan and Dunjaba. You may know me as Liish Kozlowski. My Ojibwe name is Yellow Cloud, and I'm really grateful to be here with each of you who have just been at the forefront of doing a lot of work for our energy sovereignty and our energy future. And I think as 2025, comes to a close, there's really a lot at stake at making sure our future isn't sold off to the highest bidder. And what we're confronting here is not just one utility. The private equity firms are really looking at who controls our energy, our land, our self-determination of our future. And really, as we're looking at privatization and corporate consolidation of power, we are also dealing with the new frontier of colonialism, which is data colonialism. As of course, these private equity firms also are really gearing us towards data centers and the extraction there. And I grew up watching a lot of Judge Judy, and she said, "Don't pee on my leg and then tell me it's raining." And Minnesotans are raising the alarms, and that's what we're doing here tonight. I think I'm looking forward to a good conversation about what we can do, and rest assured there is a lot. But just sort of, this morning I was drinking my cup of coffee, and I was today years old when I learned that freaking Cafe Bustelo, like everything in our country and global world, can be traced back to private equity firms, including BlackRock. If you follow back who owns Cafe Bustelo, it's Smuckers and Vanguard, and who owns the largest share. So when we look at things like Google, largest shareholder in BlackRock, and we look at transparency and the issues that we're contending with, goodbye SEC filings and transparency, but that private equity really wants to get its grips on everything. They have a share in housing and apartment buildings and nursing homes, to the products that we buy and use every day. And so I, like Senator McEwen, agree. Let's move us to a true public utility system. Let's put that power back into our local hands. I also just want to say that there's a lot coming up that we can do, and this deal is not done until it's done. And so we got local contracts that are coming up. We've got the Attorney General has the ability to act and take legal action. I'm sure there'll be lawsuits, right? There's more process with the PUC there's things happening at the federal level to qualify these private equity firms as non-financial banks and getting a crack at all of the networks and things that they're doing behind the scenes to really have unchecked power and consolidation. So looking forward to the conversation, and just know that we're going to be here standing strong so that the corporate greed doesn't get the final word.
Thank you so much, Senator and Representative. One of the things I wanted to say was, as we were introducing the Senator and the Representative, is just how appreciative we are to them for stepping in the process thus far. I didn't run what I was about to say past them, so I hope this is okay. But as someone who lives in northern Minnesota and is a Minnesota Power customer, the folks who represent me at the legislature didn't really show up for this. And so I'm really grateful that we do have folks, elected representatives who are showing up, who know how important this is and are representing us. So thank you to you both. The other thing, I wanted to do a little bit of housekeeping, or just sort of what's going on in this Zoom space. So the chat is open. We're in sort of a meeting format because we do want this to be a bit of a public format. Your audio and your video are disabled right now, and that's just to keep things manageable and as things are going forward. But I encourage folks to put questions into the chat. Share resources. Of course, use your discretion there, because if too much is going on in the chat, it can get a little distracting for folks who are trying to listen or folks who are trying to speak. But we do really want to know what you have to say, and especially what your questions are. We're going to move into a panel discussion and hear from folks who have been sort of deeply involved in this process. I have some questions prepared, but also if you have questions, either hopefully we'll be able to incorporate them into the discussion now, but it's also just really helpful for us to know what you all want to know about. And then hopefully if we don't get to these things today, we can answer them in some other way going forward, because this is going to be a process, y'all. We've got a lot more ahead of us, even though this deal has been approved. So with that, so yeah, the format, as I said, is right now we're going to go into a panel discussion with a few folks, and then after that, depending on time and folks' energy, we're going to go into some smaller breakout rooms, specifically to discuss some things that are coming up in the near future, where we all can maybe get involved to do something about this deal, do some harm mitigation potentially, but also try to make change and sort of maybe set the stage for some of what the Senator and the Representative were talking about in terms of transforming our utility system. So with that, so I'm going to do really quick intros for who we have joining us here today. So I didn't introduce myself. My name is Maggie Schubert. I'm the Director of Strategic Initiatives at CURE, and I will be your humble and maybe a little chaotic moderator. So welcome. And then we have joining me is my colleague from CURE, Hudson Kingston, who is our legal director. We also have Jenna Yeakle, who is a campaign manager at Sierra Club's North Star chapter, who's also a Duluth resident and community organizer, and a Minnesota Power customer, as are Hudson and I as well. And Sierra Club and CURE were both formal parties to the process at the Public Utilities Commission during this process that ultimately resulted in its approval, but we were part of the staunch opposition to this deal throughout. Then we were also joined by Nicole Hale from the Private Equity Stakeholder Project, and PSP was CURE's expert, or one of our experts in the proceedings as well. So they have been really great partners. And last but not least, we are joined by Brandon Parker. If you are from the Duluth area, you might know Brandon, but Brandon is a member of Twin Ports DSA, is also a very involved community advocate and a government accountability zealot, for if that's an okay word to use, who is, I think really deeply involved with things that are happening at the local level here in Duluth. So I'm really excited to have this mix of folks here to talk about this issue. So diving in, how this is going to work, as I said, I have some prepared questions. I'm going to direct them at folks just to keep things moving along, but I also invite our panelists, if you have something to add to respond to the question, please, chime in. So with that, I am going to start with you, Nicole. Sorry, I hope that's okay. So as someone who is, has been thinking, I guess what I'll say is, I think we all hear about private equity a lot increasingly, but I would certainly have included myself in this camp even just sort of a year and a half ago, maybe didn't have a strong understanding of what private equity even is and what that even means when we say a private equity company. So could you break that down for us a little bit generally, give us a brief description of what private equity is and what the private equity business model is?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to jump right in. I'm so happy to be here with you all. It's been really nice to see everybody. As Maggie said, my name is Nicole. I'm with the Private Equity Stakeholder Project. We're a nonprofit watchdog organization around the private equity industry, and we've been partnering with Cure, as well as Jenna and others for probably about a year and a half at this point around this acquisition. So I'm happy to give you a brief overview about private equity in a way that's hopefully concise and can be sort of additive to the conversation that we're going to be having for the rest of our time together today. So in broad strokes, private equity firms are investment firms. They pool money from a variety of high net worth investors in order to buy controlling stakes in companies with the hopes of increasing profits through things like cost cutting, restructuring, planning, etc. They may also bring in new management or sell off parts of a business to make it more profitable. Essentially, they're trying to increase revenue while minimizing costs in order to resell a company in a few years. And they would like to sell that at a premium, ideally. So in the case of utilities, what that might mean is that a private equity-owned utility may raise rates, it may defer maintenance, delay future investments, or even reduce personnel. In general, private equity firms typically aim to own companies for about 5 to 10 years before selling those companies at a higher price than they bought them for to pay out themselves as well as their investors. So the private equity business model relies on what we call institutional investors. So those are investors like pension funds, endowments, insurance companies, who all pool their money together in what's called a private equity fund. So after private equity firms have solicited, these investments, the private equity firm begins to make purchases with this pool of funding. And for context, pension funds are over a third of the investors in the private equity industry. And the main one of, I guess, there's probably a few differences between the private equity business model and more traditional investing can be thought of as a difference between passive and active investing. So let's look at BlackRock, for example. They own shares in most companies, many companies traded on the New York Stock Exchange. They may own 5, 10, 15, whatever it is, stake in a company through a stock purchase. And this gives BlackRock limited control over the day-to-day operations of these companies because they are one of multiple investors and they own a relatively small stake. Now with Elite, the strategy was different. Global Infrastructure Partners is a private equity firm that's owned by BlackRock. So, which means that Minnesota Power is owned by a private equity firm called Global Infrastructure Partners, which is owned by BlackRock. A little complicated, but I think we can get there. And this gives BlackRock much more say over the day-to-day operations. It also means that they have a lot more power in choosing who to appoint to leadership positions. And another sort of important factor to note is that private equity deal making typically occurs without oversight by regulators, and the details are not required to be disclosed to the Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC. So whereas Elite, as a publicly traded company, was giving financial disclosures to the SEC, those go away when a private equity firm buys out a company. So now that Elite is outright owned by BlackRock through its subsidiary Global Infrastructure Partners, Minnesota Power is now owned by the largest investment company in the world, and it's purchased with the retirement savings of public sector workers from some of the largest public pension funds in the country. So this investors include the New York City pension funds, the city of Los Angeles, as well as the states of Oregon and Washington. So engagement with Elite's owners include both BlackRock and GIP, Global Infrastructure Partners, as well as the pension funds who provided them with the capital that they needed to purchase Elite, and these pension funds also have a vested stake in the management of Elite. So that's the quick version. And as Maggie said, I'm more than happy to answer questions or get into the specifics as we dive in further.
Thanks, Nicole. And yeah, I think you started getting at what is my next set of questions, right? In terms of like what actually happened here. And I think one of the things that is sometimes confusing, and I think intentionally so, and you sometimes hear from people who are defending this deal is like, oh, BlackRock was already the biggest shareholder of Elite and Minnesota Power. So, right, like this isn't that big of a change. And I think you're starting to get at some of what no, actually, this is a pretty major change in terms of who owns and who controls Elite and Minnesota Power now. So yeah, I don't know if Hudson, turning to you, if there's sort of anything you want to build there on in terms of how things changed for Minnesota Power, but sort of the next set of questions is what actually happened here.
Yeah.
What was the deal? Nicole already started getting that, but how did we get to the stage where this got approved? What was the process? And what are some of these relationships look like now?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so Nicole did name a couple of the entities, and I that's sort of what I'm going to talk about what the deal was overall. And as we've said, Global Infrastructure Partners is part of BlackRock now, and the Canadian Pension Plan Investment Fund is a very big pension investment entity in Canada, as its name indicates. GIP, the first one, bought 60% of Minnesota Power's parent company, Elite, and CPP, the Canadian guys, bought 40%. GIP broke its investment up between a big group of rich entities and the California Pension Fund. So 40% is a bunch of rich guys, lots of different entities there, and 20% is California, and 40% is Canada, to be very, very general. The first 40% is a short-term fund that's a revolving fund. So they buy the company, they hold it for a little while, and then they sell it. They really don't have a long-term plan for this company. The 20% owned by California and the 40% owned by the Canadians maybe will be held a little bit longer. In the past, Canadian Pension Plan Investment Fund has owned a utility for 12 years. But that's what we're talking about. Really long-term investments for these guys is 12 years. So we're talking about companies that are purchased as an investment, are changed, and then flipped in a short period of time, especially by the standards that we would hold a utility to. So a utility like Minnesota Power has been around for more than 100 years. It was a public company owned on the stock market for about 75 years. And now it is going into a new era of private equity ownership, which could mean a lot of churn, a lot of uncertainty, a lot of things happening that have never happened in Minnesota before. And so the two investors actually own another entity called Alloy Parent, and Alloy Parent owns Elite, and Elite owns Minnesota Power. So that's the corporate shell game that we're dealing with. We have these two entities. They own something called Alloy Parent, and that is the thing that owns Elite. And that's important because our regulators don't have any control over Alloy Parent. It is a fairly unregulated, independent entity that doesn't have to report to almost anyone, whereas Minnesota Power is regulated as a public utility in Minnesota. I don't know if is that a good enough table setting, Maggie?
Yes, I think so. Sorry. was having problems unmuting. Um, yeah, I mean, I think, right, yes, and I think here also, if folks here are listening and are like a little lost, right, like, yeah, I think that's totally, I mean, to some extent, it's by design, right? Like it is sort of intentionally hard to follow these things. And I think that that's true for the general public, but I think, I think that also really raises concerns in terms of sort of the regulatory structure and this sort of this belief that our regulators have that they have a really strong handle on the situation. And that seems like a hard assurance to make, given what we know about the complexity of this deal and sort of the global nature of it and things like that. So I think that's so a segue. So that's one of my concerns. And so my next questions are, I think maybe following up with you, Hudson, if you have anything to add, but also Jenna, so here we are. This deal has been approved. Why does it matter? Why are we worried about it? I think we started to get into some of it in terms of like the concerns with regulation, but what are the specific risks? What are our specific concerns? And I guess one of my leading questions is why are entities like BlackRock and Global Infrastructure Partners and Canadian Pension Plan Investment Board even interested in utilities like Minnesota Power, but utilities in general, because we do see that this is a growing trend of private equity trying to buy utilities. So Hudson and/or Jenna, both of you, not at the same time though, please. So yeah.
I'll stay in my lane, but I'll start. So like I said, we have regulators who regulate Minnesota Power. Above that, there's an entity called Elite that owns other parts, other little businesses that are associated with Minnesota Power. And then above that, there's something called Alloy Parent. Nobody regulates Alloy Parent as far as I know. So normally Minnesota Power is, last week, Minnesota Power was a publicly traded company. If anything bad happened, they would have to immediately file things with the Securities and Exchange Commission. There were 5 banks doing financial analysis on them at all times. And whenever something bad happened, the stock market would hear about it, reporters would hear about it, regulators would hear about it because they have to make public filings. These are laws that we've had since the stock market crash in the Great Depression. Now they've been taken private. They don't have to do any of that reporting. We won't know if they fire their accountants. We won't know if they don't pay their debts. And the way that this, and I will probably hand it to Nicole to fill in any gaps, but the way that this normally works is they load these companies up with excessive amounts of debt in order to get profit quickly so that they can use it for other things. So Minnesota Power is not valuable to them just because the ratepayers will be paying the bills for Minnesota Power, but also in the short term, they can reap large amounts of money just by going into debt. And specifically, Alloy Parent can go into debt. It owns nothing besides Minnesota Power. It has no assets. It has no interests that are anything besides this company. But this unregulated entity can take on massive amounts of debt, and that will not be regulated by the regulators who regulate our utility. And you know in your bones what that means, right? Like if you took out a mortgage and you went to a payday lender and you went to a loan shark and then you went to 5 more loan sharks and then you went to a really scary loan shark, that's the business model. That's how they are managing their books. And that raises the risk on Minnesota Power. It raises the risk that Minnesota Power will default on its debts. It raises the risk that it might ultimately go bankrupt. It raises the risk that it will stop providing us with good service. It's just a risk bomb because when they go into that much debt, if anything goes wrong with their plans, they'll run out of cash flow, and then they'll have to do something dramatic like selling off parts of the company or firing everyone. I know that sounds dramatic, but we put a lot of testimony in the record that showed that these things are much more likely when a company is taken private. So I'm going to hand it to Nicole on anything I may have said that needs to be corrected.
I think that's great. I was just worried that you could come for my job at this point. No, that all sounds great to me. I think yeah, I can just hammer home that one of the big risks here is the use of debt, right? And is exactly as Hudson laid out. A common private equity playbook, and some people in the chat have been uplifting examples of companies that have gone through bankruptcies because of their private equity backers, and that is a fear, right? So the mechanism works in that private equity companies are able to essentially have the companies that they own take out large loan balances, and they use part of that loan balance to pay themselves back. And the portfolio company or the company that they bought is left sort of paying the bill every month. This is sort of a classic private equity playbook technique. And again, like with Minnesota Power being regulated by the Minnesota PUC, but Blackstone and the subsidiaries below, kind of in between those two, not being regulated. That's definitely one of the risks of private equity owning a utility for sure.
And then Jenna, would you also illustrate for us the environmental concerns?
Boy, would I ever. And I am seeing some folks in the chat talk about the 100% bill that was passed in 2023. So Sierra Club was like particularly and uniquely involved because of the public basis for this sale, which was the claim that this was a deal meant to provide the capital needed for Minnesota Power to transition and meet our 100% by 2040 carbon-free mandate. In the record, in the ALJ report, in our testimony, and so many others, other parties, we know and we've argued, and the ALJ knows, and the PUC should know that this deal was never about providing capital for clean energy. It was about making money for existing shareholders and for the private equity interests that just gobbled up elite. So I'm going to take a quick step back to also provide some context for some other decisions that the Public Utilities Commission is considering and will be needing to make while all of this has happened. So this last year, Minnesota Power also proposed its next 15-year resource plan, its integrated resource plan, which included like a ton of new gas plants. It included continuing to burn its remaining coal plant until 2035. There was no new solar in their plan. And Minnesota Power leadership said time and again during this process, oh, our plan actually won't change once this deal comes to fruition. That raised a lot of questions for us just publicly, but also in the record. Like Minnesota Power's leaders, their planners were already not committed to delivering a carbon-free by 2040 plan. It is interesting, though, that one condition of the sale is that the Alloy parent company, this holding company, will have to inject from wherever $50 million into a clean, firm energy fund. Ostensibly, that means carbon-free firm resources. The issue with that right now is that category of resources, like what it means to be carbon-free, our Public Utilities Commission has said, oh, that's up for debate. And we are still questioning the definition of what it means to be carbon-free, which the spirit and the letter of the law that was passed in 2023 was carbon-free means resources that don't emit carbon. It means carbon-free. Minnesota Power, in that particular case, in front of the Public Utilities Commission right now is pushing for wood burning or biomass technology and waste to energy burning or trash incineration to count under this category of what it means to be carbon free under the law. And Minnesota Power will, because of this deal, have to redo their initially proposed integrated resource plan, show the commission how it's going to minimize a bunch of new gas that they want, and map out what that means, what that clean, firm means. And what we are understanding from this deal is that like it's not going to be good. It's not going to be clean energy. It's not going to be carbon-free energy. Our commission now is going to be under immense pressure from these very, very powerful forces to make hard decisions as commissioners. And I think folks are very rightly actively sharing in the chat their questions and concerns about AI and the growth of data centers and how that in and of itself is a threat to climate stability and social and economic stability and equity and greenhouse gas emissions. We're in a really, really sticky spot. And there's so much more that we can do to Senator McEwen's kind of hopeful message of like there are better options if we just take our power back and if we come together. So I'll count that as a check on the what are the implications and risks to a clean energy transition. It's not good. It's risky. It's bad. And yet.
Yeah, I think I want to dig in a little bit on part of the last point you started to make, and as you said, some folks are bringing this up in the chat, and goes to sort of one of the questions I had posed earlier that I don't know if we really got into, which is, so this deal got approved. Those of us who are really heavily involved said one of the reasons people should be really paying attention to this is like we think this is a harbinger of something, which is private equity interest in energy utilities in general. And unfortunately, that proved to be right. We're seeing bigger and bigger deals announced in New Mexico, private equity trying to buy a utility there, private equity buying an energy utility, a really big one over in Indiana. So the question is why? What does this have to do, given what we know about private equity's interest in adding portfolio companies that they can extract value from? Why are utilities really attracted to them to right now? And I'm just going to say it. What does that have to do with data centers? So that's who wants to start answering that?
I'm going to nominate Nicole to talk about why private equity is buying utilities.
Yeah, it's a big question, of course. But I think you can look to private equity's own statements about where they think AI is headed. I know AI, you can read a million articles about the pros and the cons of AI, whether it's a bubble or not. That being said, for example, another private equity firm, Blackstone, not to be confused with BlackRock, is one of the largest private investors in data centers. And now they're looking to buy a utility that spans New Mexico and Texas. And they've stated sort of their interest in being a leader in infrastructure. So I don't know if you will find any firm saying it outright, but if you look at their investment patterns and where they're spending their money, buying up the supply chain of AI and data centers is sort of seems to be a coordinated effort to, capitalize on this trend. But I'm sure others have. There are many sides of this coin, so I would love to hear from others on the panel too.
And
And
I
and
guess,
I
oh,
would
go ahead.
say that GIP in their marketing materials for what they were going to buy with the fund that they're using to buy Minnesota Power, they said they wanted to buy four things: utilities, ports, water infrastructure, and data centers. So of their priorities, you got three out of four. Well, no, you got four out of four in Duluth, and the rest of us don't have a port, but we do seem to have all of the things that they're aiming for.
And I mean, so just to connect the dots, what does that mean for utility customers in this case, Minnesota Power customers? Why, and the community at large? Why should that be concerning if they're investing in both of these? If they're so deeply um, investing and getting intertwined and controlling both like what is driving large generation and power growth and the companies that are building that power generation or are responsible for building that power generation. If we could just like what's the big deal?
I'll answer it on a purely money level and then hand it off to somebody else. But on a purely money level, they're targeting twice as much profit as the company normally is able to make. So right now, your utility makes anywhere between 6 and 10% profit on a yearly basis. Their profit, the return on equity is set at about 9%, a little bit above that. And if they sell more electricity than they expect, they make more. And if they sell a little bit less, they make a little bit less. The company information that I just referenced, that was to some extent leaked by the state of Connecticut, indicates that they're aiming for 15 to 20%, not 6%, not 10%, 15 to 20%. And the ratepayers are the piggy bank for that. Those of us who must get our electricity from Minnesota Power are the ones who will pay back that bill and pay back the large premium that these private equity companies paid in order to talk the company governance into taking their offer in the first place. So our experts pegged that at more than $1 billion of a premium, which means we as ratepayers, for this deal to work out for the new owners, must pay back that more than $1 billion and then pay more to pay off all the debt and other costs and profit that they're aiming for. So on a purely money basis, ratepayers are captive customers who, in theory, are going to have to pay a lot more unless these companies have a new way of making money that doesn't include milking ratepayers for higher rates. Does anyone else want to talk about it on not a money basis in the context of data centers or anything else? Or coal energy, running coal plants past their lifetime?
Yes. We're seeing across the country a massive, massive uptick in large gas plants solely for the sake of serving hyperscale data centers, not for grid reliability, not for transitioning from coal to gas to clean, just to serve as a bespoke, unique, a boutique resource for these plants. And ratepayers are going to be on the hook for that. Sometimes directly, oftentimes indirectly. There are so many environmental, like local environmental impacts when it comes to data center development. But I think what we should also be clear-eyed about in this conversation is who owns what. What are the usages of these hyperscale data centers, and what does that mean for democratic decision making, transparency, and civic engagement actually meaning something? I'm very concerned. I mean, our existing regulatory bodies in Minnesota and all over the country are already under such massive political pressure to bend to the will of industry and to CEOs. And we are now seeing massive conglomerates just like take hold of these already very powerful entities in our state government, who have, yeah, unwieldy like economic and financial power globally. And like our commissioners, our governors, our other state regulators, our legislators, like that's a lot of money. That is a lot of money and power to fight against, when like public interest and the future of us and the planet is like in their hands. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. So that actually I think is a good segue to I think what will probably be sort of the last set of questions, which is like how the heck did this happen? Uh, right. And you're starting to get at this, Jenna, right? Like about sort of, the politics involved. But right, we know that this deal was broadly unpopular. The public, and certainly, yes, there were supporters of this deal, that came from various perspectives. There's been some decent reporting on those perspectives and those, and the folks who supported this. But by and large, right, like if you're talking about numbers and broad public opinion, this was very unpopular, and people said so in the process and in the docket. And there were organizations like Cure and Sierra Club, and Citizens Utility Board who were in opposition. The Minnesota Attorney General remained and remains in opposition, to this deal as well. And yet, it was approved unanimously by the Public Utilities Commission. So how did so what were the politics around this? How did this happen? And I guess I pose this question both at, what happened at the state level, but also, asking you, Brandon, as someone who watches government processes in Duluth, what was your perspective, on what happened and what is still happening? So yeah, we can do those in either order.
I think Brandon should talk. Go for it, Brandon.
Yeah.
Yeah, certainly. So a lot of my involvement has been really kind of on the ground effort with Stop the Hermantown Data Center, and I'll try to highlight in my comments here, how the opposition to the buyout is intersecting with this kind of organic, citizen-led grassroots opposition network that is opposing the data center. So just kind of looking at like what exactly happens with the data center project, they're actively seeking out sites that are existing near electrical infrastructure, and the Adolph site in Hermantown is right next to two substations. At the same time, Minnesota Power is really pursuing transmission line infrastructure upgrades that connect the Iron Range to St. Louis County and the Arrowhead substations. FOIA requests have shown that executives at Minnesota Power knew about this proposed project for over a year and were actively inquiring about sewer and water availability for the project. That's regarding the sappy water line that feeds Cloquet, and they were inquiring about trying to meet the demand for a potential data center. The FOIA requests also showed that Minnesota Power, local city, county officials, and the developer Mortensen have been in communication for over a year. And I guess the process of hiding and obscuring that information from the public has been very deliberate and based on anticipated heavy opposition that other projects are facing around the country. And what we're seeing in Hermantown with this data center is that developers' concerns are taking precedence over those of residents. And that's really kind of galvanized the organic opposition that's risen up over the lack of transparency. So kind of getting into like possible solutions that municipalities can take to assail those transparency fears, and really prove that local government work on behalf of constituents and not private private wealthy interests is to ban signing NDAs. And there's been a lot of talk with the mayor of Superior, who showed a lot of political courage in taking that step to ban NDAs in the city of Superior. A very simple, easy, immediate response. I think one thing that needs to be better translated and interconnected in this fight is how Minnesota Power advancing this project will have widespread impact on ratepayers around the country. We're looking at 5 to 6% on average of utility rate increase over the past year. But in states where these are really proliferating, the epicenters like Virginia, Illinois, and Ohio, seeing 10 to 15% because of that demand and supply imbalance. And so a lot of proponents of the data center will kind of try to mention that like this will help your taxes go down 1 to 2%, but that talking point's really moot when as Hudson had touched on, those projected utility rate or return on investment for private equity is we're looking at 10 to 25% increase in utility rates over the next decade. So I kind of got into some like actions that could be taken locally to pressure and hold Minnesota Power accountable. And the first one would be like really looking at the franchise agreements that Minnesota Power, taking a critical look at those conditions of the agreement renewal that set out expectations for the utility's performance and reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. Jenna mentioned the kind of push for that NTEC, or the national or natural gas infrastructure, that is contrary to meeting the state's climate sustainability goals, and Minnesota Power having to go back and rewrite their integrated resource plan. And so if they, I suppose the solution like is if they can't really if they're so reliant on this natural gas and they're subject to being scolded by the PUC regarding that plan, then the city should be looking at their franchise agreement really critically and kind of weaving accountability measures into those franchise contract agreements that ensure reliability of the utility, but also pressuring them to maintain those sustainability goals. And I would also kind of look more into that franchise agreement. It's a 10 to 20-year contract typically. Duluth could argue for a 3 to 5 year contract, while at that same time, as State Senator McEwen had kind of pushed, look into that strategically pushing for the feasibility of municipalization of our energy utility. And I think an effort like this could be used as leverage to push for more energy autonomy and really push Minnesota Power to take a more active role in municipalities like Duluth's clean energy goals. And another big part of the franchise agreement is that there's a fee that is registered for Duluth. It's a 3% annual revenue that is generated by the power utility that they pay. And while other municipalities have a 5 to 7% fee, and this fee represents a very small percentage of Minnesota Power's yearly revenue. And a 10-year franchise agreement with Duluth that's up for renewal this late summer 2026. If that fee agreement were to be renegotiated, that could help provide the city more stable revenue that isn't so reliant on property taxes to meet climate sustainability efforts. I guess getting back to the Hermantown data center a bit, we saw an effort go around the environmental review process by putting forward really inadequate environmental review studies, such as the AUAR. And that review made no mention of what was proposed for the site. It was just a light industrial development. And with this review, an AUAR, it's conducted by the city of Hermantown and an engineering firm, Kimley Horn, that was hired by Mortensen. And this is kind of the same playbook that they've done throughout the state in cities like Rosemount, where the Meta has a data center. Um, and I guess what needs to happen at the state level is really pushing to have like a central permitting process or an agency like the DNR or the EQB really kind of have oversight of environmental review and have it go to a third party because it's impossible to really have a responsible government unit that would conduct an AUAR when there's that monetary economic benefit that they're chasing. Um, and then I guess that kind of just gets into a bit of what is going on at the local level regarding the private equity buyout and relating that to the data center and the what's going on there. When we get into breakout rooms, I'll kind of cover what exactly is kind of what are some ongoing campaigns with Stop the Hermantown Data Center Group, and things that we've pursued and highlight ways to get involved.
Great, thank you. And everyone remember that synopsis that Brendan just gave, because he said that that's what the breakout rooms are pretty much going to be about: the franchise agreement, the IRP, and the data center. So that was a great synopsis. Right before we do that, just going back to the state level and how we got to 5, PUC commissioners in spite of an administrative law judge saying this was not in the public interest, don't approve this deal, in spite of broad public opposition. How did this deal get approved? And we're a little short of time, but I think, right, proponents of this deal, if they're watching this, they're going to be like, well, they're not talking about any of the purported benefits. So yeah, which the PUC commissioners certainly touted, all the benefits of this, but what do we, and as part of their justification for approving it. So how did they get there? How did we get here? I guess that's for Hudson or Jenna.
In terms of the benefits not being real benefits.
In terms of the how the you could answer this a couple of different ways. You could talk about like the process, but we probably don't have time, and all of sort of the machinations that went on. But I guess sort of like how they justified this approval and why, I'm just be totally straightforward, why we don't find that sufficient.
Yeah. I mean, I guess to be very blunt, I think that the companies proposed something that was on its face very, very bad for the state of Minnesota, extremely bad. And then they negotiated a position that was a little less bad. They threw $3 million towards low-income advocates. They threw $50 million for a clean, firm technology, which, if you look at how they define that, it's literally whatever they want it to be, and not constrained by law. They threw a small rate fund to ratepayers, which I think pencils out to a few dollars for each ratepayer. And you weigh that against a purchase price that's more than $1 billion too high. So it's several $1 million in concessions versus more than $1 billion in likely costs that are going to go on ratepayers. I'll hand it over to Jenna because I think she also has thoughts.
I was going to say, don't forget the 1-year rate freeze, which is, come on. We get a rate case increase proposal from our utilities almost every year, if not every other year. So like for Minnesota Power to claim this as a win is laughable. Like that is a slap in the face to folks who are having to make very hard decisions about, do I pay my utility bill? Do I pay my insulin bill? Do I pay rent this month? Like that is an unacceptable justification for this. And it is very real. Like Energy Sense, one of the organizations that supported the settlement, like they are a low income consumer advocacy group. Like we need organizations like that at the table to defend and to protect our most vulnerable community members. And yet, like this deal is like it's so bad. It is so bad what just got passed. And like it is very real that everyone is experiencing um a cost of living crisis right now. So we just like have to hold that tension that there is like very real struggle right now. What I will say is like broadly, and I do want to make sure that we get out into breakout groups, but like I want to emphasize what I shared before, which is that like commissioners largely right now, our state regulators in the state of Minnesota don't believe that their mission is to protect the public. Our state regulators feel very beholden to the politics of state economic power, to industry CEOs, to utility leaders, than to Minnesotans. And we are seeing a really fantastic project that Sierra Club and Cure are part of to shed light on corporate the power and how that shows up in our regulatory spaces. The Department of, and I saw some folks share this in the chat or ask questions about like, where was the Department of Commerce on all of this? You know, the Department of Commerce was initially with us. They were initially opposed to the deal. And over the summer, the Department of Commerce went back on its initial position, and then along with it brought organizations who are not parties to the case, experts who show up at the Public Utilities Commission to back up the deal and to give political cover to our commissions. Those organizations and the Department of Commerce gave credibility to Minnesota Power and the partners' claims of capital for clean energy. And that is the dynamic that we saw publicly. And like Hudson and I can share receipts on like who talked to who, what phone calls were made. We won't share that here. But it was power. It was power. And when we say the Department of Commerce, we also mean the Walz administration. Like that should be synonymous. Who's the ultimate decision maker in the state of Minnesota? Who holds the power? It's Walz. And we need to be very clear about that when we see decisions like this that are so deeply unpopular, that are so deeply harmful to folks now and generations from now, that's who made this decision. I wield my time.
No, I think that was a really, if dark, if real, if dark, but a appropriate way to end the panel part of this, right? But I also, right, like, yeah, no, it's I think I've heard certainly from this group of people and from folks in general, like the deep level of frustration and like confusion about like, well, what do we even do if, the powers that be, the folks who make these decisions are so unresponsive to what people actually want. And, I'm not going to pretend like the folks on this panel have those answers yet, but that's part of the work that we're trying to figure out. And this is, sort of the start of us trying to work with you all to figure it out. Well, thank you everyone for coming and for sticking around. We are almost at like an entire hour and a half in your evening. And so I super appreciate that. This was obviously, right, like these were very small breakout rooms. As I said, this wasn't time for like deep strategic thinking. I hope it was just sort of a taste of like some of the opportunities, as I said, again, to disrupt things. Yes, the deal has been approved, but we do have levers. That's what they are right now, levers, right? Like they're not like guarantees that we're gonna change anything, but they're levers. And I think hopefully some of these spaces are, yes, there's the actual potential to change things in those spaces, but they are also platforms to uplift different narratives and different visions of what we want the future to look like. We got a little bit into the IRP conversation. And, you know, part of that work is laying the groundwork to tie it all back in what representative and the senator were saying at the beginning about thinking differently about what our utility system looks like and what our energy future looks like and what it means for the people to have greater control, if not ownership, over that. And so, yeah, if you are at this webinar, it means you have registered and you are signed up into our list. So you'll get information from us about opportunities moving forward. And so I hope you'll keep an eye out for that. And we'll be having more of these discussions soon. So thanks, everyone, and have a wonderful evening, and happy Hanukkah and happy holidays.